Animation knows no boundaries when it comes to your creativity and imagination, except that it must still be rooted in real-world principles. These real-world principles are what makes your animation an accurate illusion of life, which is also the name of the book, where the 12 principles of animation was shown for the very first time by the Disney animators Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas. From the time it was first published in 1981 till today in 2024, the 12 principles of animation still remain the primary guide for animators in making their animations more believable and true to life. And despite animators using profoundly more evolved technology and tools as well as computer-based animation software today, these 43-year-old 12 principles still remain the foundation for good animation. Are they still relevant in today's time as opposed to back when it was initially created? Well, hopefully we're going to find out. So in today's video, we learn the 12 principles of animation. Oh, and one more thing. If you're an After Effects animator, you're in for a treat, because I'm going to also be sharing exactly how to think about these principles inside After Effects and how it can be applied. So let's get into it. Squash and stretch is the principle that helps describe the weight and mass of an object when acted on by gravity and or other objects. In showing the exact amount that this object can be squashed and stretched, the animator can say something about the nature of this object and its exact characteristics.
Let's take a look at this ball bounce, for example. This ball at the moment does not have any squash and stretch applied to it. So we don't really have enough information on the nature of this ball. It's not really telling me a story yet. The physical characteristics of this ball is also unclear. However, if we add some squash and stretch, this is how it's going to look. If we slow this down, you're going to see when it hits the floor, it squeezes and squishes down. So that's the squash. And then once we go up and go to the highest speed, the ball starts stretching. As it reaches the highest point, it goes back to its normal size. So that's in a nutshell the principle of squash and stretch.
This makes the object more identifiable, believable, and eventually more engaging for the viewer. Now try this principle yourself and let me know your results. If you're a keen observer of motion, you will have noticed that before an action is performed, for a very short time, there is a preparation for that action first. This is by recoiling and moving in the opposite direction for a little while before the final action is completed. This is the principle of anticipation, and it plays a crucial role in creating believability in your animations.
So let's take a look at this cube, for example, just to absorb the principle better. As the cube starts to move from left to right of the page, you will notice that the cube starts rotating backwards for a brief amount of time. And that is anticipation. That due to the recoil and rotation backwards, the cube gains momentum to move forward. That is the basic essence of the principle of anticipation, that things don't move immediately forward. They have a short moment of a recoil before it starts to move. And also when you see that the cube has reached the end of the page on the right side, you'll see that it anticipates again for a short amount of time, accentuated by those lines, and then it slides back to the left.
So from simple UI animations to complex characters, the principle of anticipation has the power to imbue life into your artwork because it's so true to real-world physics. And there's a good reason why pro animators use anticipation in their work all the time. Staging is the principle that says anything that is presented on a canvas or a screen must be completely and unmistakably clear.
So here's a quick example to demonstrate staging. Right now we have just a cube at the center of the canvas and it really does nothing at the moment. So we want to add animations to give emphasis to the cube. So the way I've done this is by adding a spotlight here, as you can see, and then added some animation to the cube. Also at the end, we've added some nice glow reflections, which all comes together and adds emphasis to the animation that we want to show. So that's a quick example of how staging can work inside animations.
Another thing that this principle allows us to do is to direct the viewer's attention. Let me explain.
Let's take a look at a way of directing the viewer's attention and kind of understand this concept better. I've already laid down a null here to use it as a camera. And what I'm going to do is right before the animation is going to start, I'm going to add some keyframes on the camera layer and zoom in right before it finishes its dance. So almost like while it's doing its action. So I'm going to just throw down some keyframes here. I'm gonna go in and also add some easing to this to give it some flavor. And then we have our little zoom in. So we have the light come in and then we zoom in and there you go. So this is just one way kind of demonstrating how directing the viewer's attention happens, and the camera movement also becomes one of the elements you use to stage your animation.
Straight ahead and pose to pose are the two main methods of animating things in traditional frame-by-frame animation.
So here's a quick demonstration of how both the pose to pose and straight ahead methods work in animation. Keep note that I'm showing you this example inside After Effects, which is a 2D digital animation software. These two methods are mainly used in traditional animation. However, I've added some diagrams that I'm going to show you in a bit to demonstrate to you how this actually works. We have a ball here rolling from the left to the right of the canvas. Very simple. It just speeds up and then slows down and then stops. If I were to animate this in pose to pose, I would first draw only the main frames through which the ball passes, drawing the first frame and then the next most important frame and then the next and the next and so on. Afterwards, I would go in and draw in all the in-between frames. So that's the method really. There are many benefits. You can plan really much better. So for instance, if I had already drawn these keyframes, I know how my in-between keyframes would have to look like. And especially when it comes to complex animations, it's important to keep that consistency. So that's why animators prefer pose to pose. However, straight ahead is basically not animating the keyframes first or dividing up the process into two parts. The animators would animate each and every frame from start to finish, just head on, one by one, right from the start to the end in a linear fashion. This is how it would actually look like if I would have a diagram. And straight ahead also has many benefits. It allows you to be quite flexible. It allows you to be quite experimental. So I would say pose to pose is quite effective when it comes to complex character animations. But straight ahead makes much more sense when the animation is quite simple, or when you're, for instance, animating effects, and the decision of course always lies in the hands of the animator. However, in After Effects, this looks a little different. In After Effects, we have keyframes only. So you can say that in After Effects, it's always pose to pose. The computer does the in-between frames for you. However, I would suggest that every animator, regardless of being a 2D digital animator or not, should try pose to pose and straight ahead on a traditional animation software, even if it's digital, like Adobe Animate or TV Paint or even Photoshop. Then you could actually take a look at how that actually works. You could even do it traditionally, right? You can do a flip book animation. You may not use it daily if you're a 2D animator in After Effects, but that understanding plays out when you're planning and animating in After Effects as well.
Quite similar to anticipation, overlapping action and follow through is a secondary animation that happens in addition to the main action, but this time after the animation is completed.
Here's a quick example I created in After Effects to demonstrate the principle of overlapping action and follow through. Here, as you can see, the ball just bounces up and down, but it has attached to it these two strings. So as you can see, the string is offset. So as the ball hits the topmost part, which is right here, and it starts falling down, due to the amount of gravity and due to the weight of the strings being lighter than the ball, while the ball is falling, the strings drag behind the ball and stretch upwards, so it's animated a little later than the ball always. So that's basically the idea of overlapping action.
So just as the main action needs an anticipation, it also needs to follow through. This principle is again taken from the physical world and is rooted in real world physics. In real life, nothing starts to move or stop immediately. There's always a gradual increase in speed, then a duration of constant speed, and then a gradual decrease in speed before the motion completely stops. This is the principle of ease in and ease out. And when it's applied to your artwork and graphics, it gives that believability and true to life feeling.
So here we have once again a simple animation. Currently, this ball has no easing to it. It's not really moving in a realistic way because it just stops immediately and then starts immediately. But that's not how things work in real life, as explained before. Actually, in real life, it would start slow, gain some speed, and then slowly end when the action is over. This is a little bit more realistic. So here's a little diagram to kind of show you what it would look like without ease in and ease out. The frames would be drawn in equal distance to each other. However, when I add the ease in and ease out, the diagram looks a little bit like this. So to make it start slow, I'm going to draw the frames closer to each other and then later draw the frames further away from each other to show speed, and then again slow down by drawing the frames closer to each other again. It's through spacing that you can add ease in and ease out. And in After Effects, the program does the in-betweens for you. So what becomes important for the animator in After Effects is to manipulate the speed and the value of change between the keyframes.
So remember, ease in and ease out is a very simple but vital principle of animation that will make your work more believable and accurate to life. In reality, things rarely move in a mechanical way straight forward and straight backward and turn always in right angles. Rather, things tend to move in arcs. Rather than turning like this to speak, we rather swing and sway in arcs.
So let's take a look at an example of how the principle of arc works in animation. So here we have a simple ball bounce that comes in from the left side and stops at the right. But as you can see, the way the ball bounces up and down, it isn't really realistic. It kind of goes in a triangular form and it's moving quite mechanical. However, if I were to add arcs to this is how it would look. So as you can already see that it's a little bit more realistic and it adds believability to the movement of the ball.
Secondary action are smaller animations that are created to support the primary action. Once again, this principle is extremely dynamic and can be used in various ways inside an animation. Let's start with an easy example.
We have a UI button in the middle of the screen and then a mouse pointer comes in and clicks the button. Simple. However, the animation takes on a completely different meaning and becomes much more clearer, dynamic and interesting when we add some secondary action. Now this time the mouse button comes in, hover effect happening with the white square appearing behind the button, and then we have these accents kind of flying out when the mouse clicks on the button. That's just a quick example of how adding some smaller animations to the main action adds a lot more value to what you want to show and the message you want to deliver.
Just like it's impossible to have a sentence without a noun and a verb, similarly, there can't be an animation without timing and spacing. These are the two core concepts in animation. So timing is how long it takes for your graphic to move from point A to point B, considering point A and point B are the key poses or the key frames. Spacing, however, is the number of frames used to get from point A to point B. So this refers essentially to the in-between frames between point A and point B.
So once again, just to demonstrate what timing and spacing is, I have created a very simple ball bounce. And if I were to demonstrate through a diagram what timing is in this animation, I would show it a little bit like this. And you see the line demonstrates the amount of time that it took for the ball to go from left to right. And I've done the math for you and it is actually taking 1.13 seconds, which is the settings for this animation. So that is timing for you. If I were to demonstrate how spacing would look like in this animation, it would look a little bit like this. Here we have the circles on the top demonstrating the distance between each drawing if it were done in traditional animation. So for instance, because this animation is kind of starting slow, it's taking an anticipation, so it's staying here for a bit, also like squishing a little bit, and that's what we are showing with these multiple frames right in the beginning, and then it shoots up, so it's just one frame in the middle, and then it slows back down here in the top. So again, there are multiple frames drawn here that are close to each other to show you the slow movement. Again, it shoots back down, so there's just one frame. The spacing between those frames and the number of frames I draw shows you the speed of the animation, and then again the drawings get closer to each other to show you the slow down. So here once again, if I play it back, this is what spacing would look like.
So timing and spacing are the two core foundational concepts that every animator must master to be able to animate really well. Exaggeration is the principle that has been a part of much controversy. You see, the 12 principles of animation was developed by two animators from a specific time doing a specific kind of work with very limited resources compared to today. With the evolution of technology and the change in human attention span and the amount of detail that we can easily show in our animations today, it's been argued that exaggeration can only be applied to a certain kind of work. And maybe that's true. Perhaps we don't need to exaggerate everything that we animate. One example could be that you want to show a subtle action to strike a deep chord in the audience. However, something that the legendary Alan Becker in his 12 Principles of Animation video said that I want to share with you now that helped me understand this principle better. That exaggeration doesn't need to mean more distorted. It rather means more convincing. And I would go beyond that to add that it actually creates emphasis for your animations rather than a distortion of its form.
So once again, here you can see I've created a very simple character for the demonstration. Here we see the character is just standing in a neutral pose. But if I were to show this character really happy, what I would do is I would manipulate a few characteristics in the character, sell that message. So if I go to this next frame, I would add a bit more movement to the hands, widen the smile a little bit, the eyebrows go up. Is this really showing that the character is happy? Have I really sold the message effectively? However, if I were to exaggerate this character's pose and expression, then I can really show and sell the message that this character is really happy. Here, as you can see, I've gone beyond to make the smile really large, the eyebrows really high up, the eyes almost closing in joy, his arms are quite high up in the air, and he's on one leg. So that's really the essence and the power of what exaggeration can do to your animation to really sell the message that you want to give to the audience.
So use exaggeration with awareness and in a way that it fits exactly what you want to say. The principle of solid drawing: add weight, balance and volume to their graphics and artwork. These elements help show depth in your graphics. So if you're a digital animator and you don't really have to do traditional animation or even draw daily for your work, I would still encourage you to learn solid drawing and the basics of drawing three-dimensionally, because this will help you apply those concepts effectively in your own work and in your digital illustrations and graphics. This will undoubtedly level up your work and make you a more sought-out designer and animator in the creative industry. Appeal is the principle of animation, which states that everything that we animate, be it the graphics, the assets, the heroes and villains, even complete scenes, have to be somewhat pleasing to look at. Now, this doesn't mean that each frame has to be a highly detailed, complex scene. It simply means that it must be interesting and attractive enough to grab the viewer's attention. Now that you've learned the 12 principles of animation, it's important to keep in mind one thing. These principles were made by two legendary animators of their time. They developed it at a specific time in the industry while doing a specific kind of animation. So it is important for today's animators to be aware of how they use these principles, how they can modify it, improve it, and apply it to their own animation in today's context and in the needs of their project. And it's also important to note that with practice, these principles will become second nature, and that's the goal. So try using it in your projects right away. Create something from scratch. Make up your own projects or create your own 12 principles of animation video just to learn and absorb these principles better. And in conclusion, it's also important to remember that animation is and will always remain an ever-evolving and dynamic industry with boundless potential.